And I'm delighted to welcome from the band drummer Nick Mason. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
Welcome to the programme, and we're here to talk about your brand new band, which is called the Saucerful of Secrets. And you're performing songs from a very particular era in Pink Floyd's amazing back catalogue. Why was the time right now, Nick, in 2018 to form a band and go on the road again?
I think because I'm beginning to feel a bit elderly, and I think the best thing to combat that is to actually get out and play, which is the thing I really enjoy doing. We did an exhibition last year at the V&A Museum, which was great fun to work on, but actually you end up beginning to feel like you're sort of part of English heritage or something. And I wanted to actually play music rather than just talk about it.
Now, this is the first time you've actually been on the road for more than 20 years. Do you miss that kind of thing? Do you miss, the regimentation of going from city to city and playing show after show?
Yeah, I do miss it, and it's one of the things I'm really looking forward to is sort of getting back to that. I like the sort of camaraderie of being in a band and sort of sharing the experience. But of course, basically, what I really like doing is showing off.
Now, as I said earlier, you're concentrating on a very specific period in Pink Floyd's incredible career, from 1967 just up to, pre-Dark Side of the Moon. Why did you focus on that particular, bunch of albums and bunch of songs, Nick? What was the idea behind that?
Well, I think there's partly because the rest of the band are very fond of that particular era. I certainly am, and I feel that it's maybe it's slightly underexplored. And what with David and Roger being out and all the myriads of tribute bands, it seemed that this would be something we could do and maybe sort of make our own and interpret in a slightly new way.
And I mean, when you went back to those records again, to refamiliarise yourself with the songs and the arrangements and that kind of thing, I'm talking specifically about The Piper at the Gates of Dawn in 1967 and also The Saucerful of Secrets the following year. Did you find out anything new about the band, about the songs, about yourself when you started reacquainting yourself with the songs?
Yeah, I mean, the most interesting thing is that the songs were actually far more complex than I remembered. One remembers the sort of basic melody and the rhythm and so on, but the way that Sid wrote was fairly unique, and the structure of the songs is actually, as I say, more complex than I remembered.
I mean, do you, by just force of habit, I guess, do you listen to these records, when you're at home, when you're driving about in the car, do you put them on from time to time, or did you have to actually go back and kind of re-examine them for this bunch of shows?
I really had to start from scratch. One of the things that's sort of interesting is that I never listen to any of our old material unless it happens by chance to come up.
Yeah.
Or unless there's a reason, like now, to actually sort of learn the parts that I forgot 50 years ago.
Now, you have said in the past few weeks that, you were very sort of conscious of not being some kind of Pink Floyd tribute act, that you really wanted to capture the spirit of that particular era. There was a bit of trepidation and caution, I think it's fair to say, on your part, wasn't there?
Oh, definitely. It's a long time not to have done something, and you're sort of conscious that there's a sort of history there and people expect a certain amount. I mean, I think, as I've said, I didn't want to be a tribute band. I don't want to be judged on whether we play it exactly as it was played in 1967. I want the if there was room for improvisation, then I'd like us to improvise.
Now, it's a five-piece band. The Saucerful of Secrets is five-piece band, with yourself and drums, of course. And, one of the members is Guy Pratt, the long-time Pink Floyd bass player. And perhaps most surprisingly, on guitar and vocals, is Gary Kemp from Spandau Ballet. How musically did your paths cross? Did you know Gary's work from his band?
Oh, yes. I mean, I knew Gary as a friend for a long time, but of course I'm familiar with Spandau Ballet and what they've done. To some extent, Gary has been the sort of shining star because people are so surprised that someone who's good in one genre of music can just switch to doing something else, whereas, of course, it's music. So a good musician can play innumerable sorts of styles.
And of course, the ultimate irony, I guess, with Gary Kemp and Spandau Ballet is that they were one of the bands that was supposedly coming along to wipe all the bands like Pink Floyd off the face of the musical earth, weren't they?
I don't know about Spandau. Certainly, over 50 odd years, we've had a number of bands who've apparently been going to wipe prog rock off the face of the planet. I remember, perhaps most memorable was the punk era.
Yeah.
But actually, what we have is a situation where we, the dinosaurs, are still roaming free.
And roaming free very successfully.
Hopefully.
Now, the last time you hit the road with Floyd, I say, was more than 20 years ago, and it was private jets and huge entourages and road crews of 200 people at a time. You're really getting back to basics because you've already played some club gigs, in some club venues, down south in London and what have you. Is it nice, Nick, just to go back to basics and get on the tour bus and sort of head out and sort of do it all the way you used to do, I guess, way back in the 60s?
Well, first of all, Billy, you have to realise that for someone like me, it's an absolute nightmare because I've had to dispense with my wardrobe, my hair and makeup, the sushi chef, the ambience coordinator. I don't know how I'm going to manage.
There's a price to be paid for making great art, Nick.
No, it's absolutely terrific. I really like that whole thing of just getting back to playing the music and enjoying that. It is still a lot more complicated than it was 50 years ago. We still need, in terms of sort of monitor mixing and so on, we're certainly a lot more crew than we had. We're well below the 200, but there's probably 6 crew now rather than the 2 we managed with in 67.
Let's go back to 67, Nick, because, when Pink Floyd, were making their way in the world, I guess, you were playing gigs at the now legendary UFO Club in the heart of the West End of London. You had the psychedelic light show and the incredible, visual images and that kind of thing. Did it really feel like you were kind of writing your own rule book? Because I guess there wasn't any kind of template back then for what you were doing.
I don't think we felt we were writing our own rule book so much as simply getting on with what we thought we could do. I mean, I think in comparison, everyone else who was around at the time just seemed so professional, actually. And we just found this sort of niche where we had an audience and we actually then had a record deal and so on. And I think we were probably really almost surprised by how things took off.
I mean, how exciting was it? Because, we hear about this place called the UFO Club where you would look out and there'd be all these famous musicians looking back at you and you'd be up on the stage, doing your thing. Was it a great and very vibrant, very creative musical scene?
Well, it was, but rather briefly. And I think the thing to remember is that, yes, we'd play UFO on Friday night in London and Paul McCartney would come down to see us and that was fantastic. And then on Saturday we were up in Doncaster playing in a top-ranked ballroom where the audience absolutely hated us.
So it was that extreme? You went from one extreme to the next then?
Absolutely. Day by day.
Now, there's a great quote that I read from you somewhere, in which you were talking about Sid Barrett, of course, the legendary Sid Barrett, who was the main songwriter of Pink Floyd way back in the very early days of the band. You said he was a very, very talented songwriter and composer, but he just did not want to be in a group. Was he a very complex character? Was he a nice man?
He was a lovely man, and I don't think he was that complex. I mean, I think we thought he was mad as a hatter for not wanting to be in a rock band. But I think he'd sort of done that for 6 or 9 months and actually wanted to return to being a painter. Sadly, we didn't really understand that. And looking back now, I think we can see that, I mean, there were some other issues. There's certainly a belief, which I think is true, that he did had some bad LSD trips, and that helped sort of switch him off, really.
And I mean, could you see him kind of losing his way and going off the rails to an extent? I mean, were you conscious of the fact that, he was somebody who was, on one hand, so talented and so creative, but on the other hand, was clearly not seeming to enjoy it all?
Oh, yeah. No, we were very conscious of that, but we had no idea about how to deal with it.
Now, you mentioned playing those very early gigs. I've been doing a bit of research, and if my research is correct, you first hit Scotland in July of 1967 when you played 2 gigs, one at the Red Shoes Ballroom and one at the Ballerina Ballroom. What great venues. They must have been up there in Nairn in the north of Scotland.
Yeah.
Then you came down to Glasgow and you played the famous Maryland Ballroom in Sucky Hall Street in Glasgow. And then perhaps most famously on the 5th of December 1967 at the Greens Playhouse in Glasgow. The gig started at 6:15. It was 15 shillings to get in. And for your 15 shillings, you got the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Amen Corner, The Move, The Nice, The Outer Limits, and Heir Apparent. I mean, people still talk about that legendary night to this day. Do you remember anything about it?
I remember quite a lot of it because that was the only time really we did a proper, rock and roll sort of travelling show.
Yeah.
But apart from anything else, I'll always be grateful for that opportunity to see. I must have seen 20 shows, I guess, with Jimi Hendrix.
What was that like? I mean, were you aware that you were watching something that was very special and very magical?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we'd seen Jimmy for the first time in London a few times and knew that he was something truly unique. And it wasn't only Jimmy. For me, it was also Mitch Mitchell, who became a friend of mine, but actually was one that I still think is one of the great underrated rock drummers. He had a totally unique style and was also really encouraging.
And was that a case that everybody, if the gig started at 6:15 and you had 6 different bands on, did everybody just go on and play for 25 minutes or something?
Well, it was slightly more complicated than that. So the Outer Limits opened the show and they did 10 minutes. And according to quite how special you were, you did 10, 15, 20. Or I think Jimmy did 40 and the Amen Corner probably did about 30 minutes.
Yeah. And you have very fond memories of that particular night then, because as I say, it's become almost legendary here north of the border.
All the shows we did with that group of people were fantastic. But it was, it's also an opportunity to get to know some of the other artists, because it's extraordinary in a way how few opportunities there are to meet other musicians. You tend to be always in town when on your own, and everyone else is on tour somewhere else. And I'm still friends with Andy Fairweather-Lowe from Amen Corner, who was there in '67.
This is Billy Sloan on BBC Radio Scotland. In the second hour of the programme, my special guest once more is Nick Mason of Pink Floyd. And Nick, we talked about in part one of the interview, you're going to be heading out on the road playing live at the Armadillo in Glasgow on the 28th of September with your new band, the Saucerful of Secrets. Looking back over your incredible career, you mentioned in part one that, there was this great, exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London called Their Mortal Remains. I was lucky enough to check it out and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. When you were walking through all the exhibits and all the sort of illustrations of various stages of your life, what kind of surprises did it throw up for you?
I'm not sure that it threw up surprises so much as jogging memory. You see things or you hear things that you think, oh yeah, I remember that. Or sometimes, it could be a video thing or it couldn't be a sound thing. Apart from the only thing that I had no idea that was going to actually be in the show was the cane that was used to punish Roger and Storm all those years ago when they were schoolboys.
Because it was the actual cane from school, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And how did they get a hold of it? Did the school have it in some kind of glass case up in the reception that this was the cane that we used to beat Roger Waters with?
I don't think the school were quite that proud of that as a part of their heritage. I'm not sure who had kept it or looked after it, but the fact of the matter was that not only was it the cane still around, but also the punishment book.
Yeah.
So that there was an actual record of why Roger was punished, which generally was for fighting.
But when you actually strolled through the various exhibits in the exhibition, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, I have to say, it was so varied, there was so much great music, but also so many great visuals. There was the flying pig, and the animal sleeve. Is it true that it kind of broke its moorings and some farmer away up in, the countryside phoned up and said that it crash landed in one of his fields?
Yes, that's absolutely true. It was it became tricky. What happened was that we'd planned to fly the pig, and we'd had special permission from the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, to do that on condition that we had a sharpshooter there to knock it down if anything went wrong.
If it was heading for Heathrow Airport.
Exactly. So we would... On the first day, the problem was we didn't actually have enough gas to get it inflated enough to fly. So it all had to be stopped. And the next day, we had enough gas, but the sharpshooter was late. And by the time he arrived, the pig had fled and headed. The belief was it was heading back to Germany, to Hamburg, because that's where it was built. It was actually, the pig was built by the people who made Zeppelins in the First World War. And but fortunately, there was a valve on the pig, and he came down in a farmer's field. I think the farmer was probably very surprised that he had a 40-foot pig in amongst his flock of cows.
Yeah, you can only imagine what the cows must have thought when they saw this 40-foot pig heading for the field that they were grazing in. Now, I guess, you know, the real musical jewel in the Pink Floyd crown is, of course, 1973, Dark Side of the Moon, that landmark album. You know, everything about the record, from the composition to the theme to the concept to even the artwork of the album, you know, was something very special. When you were in Abbey Road making that record, Nick, did you realise that you were not just making music, you were making a bit of pop history as well?
No, I don't think we did. We knew it was the best thing we'd done so far, but one had no idea that it was going to really, well, no idea it was still going to be around sort of 40, 50 years later. I think you've said correctly. The odd thing was to get so many things right on one record. So it's not just the music or the writing, it's also that the graphics were particularly right for that moment and for that record.
And I mean, when you were in that famous Abbey Road studio, you know, and the songs were unfolding, what was there a moment where you thought, we really have got something very special here? Was it a particular song? Was it, you know, a mix you heard? What was it?
No, I think really it was probably when because we'd never really heard what we'd done until a very final assembly, when we'd assembled it with all the crossfades in position. You know, up until the last few days, really, it was very much a case of sort of bits and pieces. And so you finally put the jigsaw together and then look at it. But as I say, we knew we'd done something good. But we had no idea it was going to be a number one record in America in particular, or provide a number one single for us in America, or indeed that it was going to have the longevity that it's had.
And of course, you know, the last time anybody bothered counting, which I think was in January of this year, it sold something in excess of 45 million copies. And even in a quiet week, anywhere in the world, somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 people go out each week and buy a copy of Dark Side of the Moon. Who are these people? Why are they still buying it, do you think?
Well, my belief now is that they're rather elderly people whose memory is going, and they're walking into a place, if there are places still selling records, and going, oh, this looks interesting, unaware that they've already got 3 copies at home.
And of course, you know, when you were recording it, there was the famous story that, you know, this bloke walked into the studio one day and everybody said, who's he? And you didn't realise at first that it was Sid. Was that a sort of very poignant moment for you all?
That was Wish You Were Here, which was 2 or 3 years after Dark Side. And that was probably, in a way, more astonishing just because he walked into a recording where there is actually a sort of tribute to Sid contained within the lyrics on that record.
And he chose that moment to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned earlier in part one of the interview, you know, you did not want the Saucerful of Secrets to become some kind of tribute band. There are some great Pink Floyd tribute bands out there. I'm thinking most notably of the Australian Pink Floyd. We even have a Scottish one who are called Mac Floyd. Have you seen any of them in action? Have you crossed paths with any of them? And
yes,
are they any good?
I've seen a number of them in action, and most of them are absolutely terrific. And in a way, that's what I don't want to be doing, is competing with the Australian Pink Floyd, because they can probably do everything we've ever done rather better. So what we need to do is find something slightly different to do.
So, I mean, what's it like sitting watching the Australian Pink Floyd when they've got everything so precise, everything is so spot on because they're real anoraks as well as being great musicians, and they've got you to an absolute T. Is that a strange experience?
It's not really strange. It's just that for me, I feel it sometimes even with seeing Roger's show or something like that. That sometimes I'd rather hear an interpretation. I mean, I still really like things like Dub Side of the Moon, or Luther Right and the Wrongs, who did an entire version of The Wall as a country and western record.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. One of my fondest gig-going memories over the last 50 years, and that really is saying something, is the 2nd of July 2005, where I was lucky enough to be down at Hyde Park in London for Live Aid, which I thought was an absolutely incredible event, organised, to highlight what was going on at the G8 Summit. And of course, it was notable, first and foremost, for the eagerly awaited reunion of Pink Floyd, where yourself and David and Roger and the late Richard Wright all got on stage for the first time in something like 24 years. Was it difficult to pull that all together? How did it happen?
Well, it was entirely really Bob Geldof who made it happen. He rang round and asked David in particular whether he'd do it, and initially David absolutely wasn't going to do it and didn't want to do it. And Bob rang me up and said, "What do you think? Could you have a word with David?" And I said, "There's only one person who could actually persuade David to do it, and you'll have to get Roger to call him." So Bob, of course, who loves a challenge, picked up the phone and got Roger to ring David to ask him. And that's how it sort of kicked off. But once we'd decided to do it, I won't say hard work, but once we got into rehearsing, it all sort of fell into place, in my opinion.
What was there that odd moment, though, where you get into the rehearsal studio, a couple of weeks before the actual event and, put the instruments on and you sat down behind your drum kit and everybody looked at one another and thought, we haven't done this for something like 24 years, how strange is it going to be or how easy is it going to be?
I think, the fact of the matter is that one of the great things about music is you sit down and once you start playing, you're playing. And most of it comes back to you. Of course, you have to think a bit about whether things need a bit of rearranging or reminding yourself of some of the details. But actually playing the parts and playing together, it just... well, as I say, it just falls into place.
You have always said consistently that, you think someday, for some reason, Pink Floyd will perform again. Do you still believe that? Do you still think it will happen sometime soon?
I'm not sure that I believe it will happen. I just find myself unable to say that it's... unable to say it's all over. But I've said that I might put that on my tombstone.
Because you do have this...
I'm not sure that it's all over yet.
You do have this kind of bizarre situation where in 2015, David's out playing his favourite Pink Floyd songs as part of the Rattle and Lock tour. And then, just a few weeks ago, in fact, we went down to the Hydro in Glasgow to see, Roger perform, virtually all of Dark Side of the Moon and some of his favourite tracks. And then you're coming up to yours. It seems odd that, everybody's out doing their own version of Pink Floyd when the easiest thing would be if you could just get together and do it definitively.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'd like to explain that to Roger and David, be my guest.
Yeah, maybe somebody should sort of knock their heads together and see if we can make it happen. You're going to be coming up to Scotland, as I said, on the 28th of September when you're going to be playing live at the Armadillo in Glasgow. And, without giving the game away too much, what can we expect to see, on stage that night? What kind of show is it going to be?
Well, if I knew, I'd tell you. But hopefully, there'll be a few surprises, which will be surprises to us as well as an audience. As I say, it's early Pink Floyd material, but hopefully with a little bit of a twist, because it's not the original Pink Floyd playing it, and to some extent, the music contained opportunities for a certain amount of manipulation and the opportunities to improvise. So we're hoping to sort of continue that tradition.
Well, we're going to play another classic Pink Floyd track, which you're going to be performing as part of the Saucerful of Secrets show. And it's the band's second single way back in 1967, the classic sound of See Emily Play. What do you remember of recording that great song, Nick?
Well, I remember recording it. I think we did some of that in Sound Techniques. Although we were EMI artists, we were still doing odd bits of recording elsewhere, and that was, some of it was recorded in Chelsea. But what do I remember about it? I suppose I remember that thing of playing the drum parts and then going back into the control room, and it's sounding so much more professional than anything we'd ever done before, really.
And was it a nice feeling to get a big hit single?
Oh, it's great. I mean, that's why, that's what we went into rock music for. We actually wanted to be successful. We wanted to have a hit single.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing the song performed when you play live at the Armadillo in Glasgow on the 28th of September. Continued success, Nick. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in the programme.